Hello makers, I hope you're doing well today. My name is Juliet with Minerva. We're going to be doing some sewing today. I actually am wearing something that I made myself. It's a Bakerloo blouse and I made it using this beautiful print fabric. It's nearly 3 years now since I made it and it's just as new, right? Anyway, our sewing today is going to be making the Monty Shirt Dress by Style Arc Patterns. We're going to be making the dress version of it, shirt dress, and we're going to be using this gorgeous print. It's a Minerva exclusive Aloha Lagoon Viscose Challis fabric. Now this print is absolutely gorgeous and I love how breathable it feels, and as we know, viscose is a natural fabric made from wood pulp and it's said to be more breathable than cotton. I actually really like how it feels against my skin and I think it's going to make a beautiful shirt dress. Now over to what we're going to need. We're going to need the pattern. I have with me here 3 meters of fabric, but on the sewing pattern it tells you how much you would need for each size. I also have some lightweight interfacing, bearing in mind that I have a lightweight fabric, and I recommend making sure to choose an interfacing which would go nicely with your fabric. So you don't want to go for a very dark interfacing for a light fabric and vice versa. I also have this matching thread which would go beautifully with the fabric that I have. You can also choose to have contrasting thread because it would give your shirt dress that extra zhuzh of color if you choose to do so. I also have here 12 buttons. I'm using black buttons for this project, and as you can see on the pattern, the buttons come in sets of 2, which is something that I find very unique and I'm very excited to get on with this one. Please note that everything you're going to need for this project will be linked in the description box below, so do not forget to check out those links if you want to grab some for yourself. I'd also recommend taking some time to wash, dry and press out your fabric following the care instructions for the specific fabric you're going to be working with. Now over to the size and views of the sewing pattern. I love this pattern because of how simple and how classic it looks, and as I mentioned earlier, I like the buttons that come in sets of 2. The pattern has the shirt and the shirt dress version, and the dress can be lengthened or shortened as you wish to. On both patterns, the shirt and the dress version, we have a deep yoke. There's an extended shoulder line. The dress also has side slits which fall below the knee, but it can be shortened or lengthened as you wish. Now apart from the viscose fabric that I'm using for this dress, there are other recommendations like linen, silk or crepe fabric. So when we have a look here at my fabric, you can clearly see that it's a directional one. So the tip that I have for you is to ensure that your pattern pieces are laid out in the same direction. You want everything facing the right direction, which means that when you cut it out, it'll flow properly. Otherwise you have like pieces upside down, unless that's what you're going for. So with that tip, I'm going to go ahead and cut out all my fabric pieces, including marking any notches that are going to be required for constructing the shirt dress.
The notches are marked now, so I'm going to move on to transferring the markings for the buttonholes and the buttons. There are so many options that can be used, using tailor tacks with contrasting threads, or good old pins and tailor's chalk, pencils or fabric markers. What I'm going to do next is to stay stitch the curved parts of the fabric, like the neckline and the underarm, especially the necklines. We're going to be inserting collars. We don't want anything to go out of shape. The Monty Shirt and Dress sewing pattern comes with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is the same thing as 3/8 of an inch, and it also has a 6 millimeter or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance for internal seams like collars and things like that. Now all the seam allowances are actually marked on the sewing pattern with a dashed line, so if you're unsure, refer back to your sewing pattern as you go. I'm going to carefully press on the lightweight interfacing onto the collars, and I'm also going to press it onto the facings of the dress. With the right sides of the fabric together, we need to put the collars on top of each other, pin them together and then sew the 3 outer edges of the collar. This sewing pattern comes with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, so at the sewing machine we're going to start from 1 centimeter away from the edge of the collar and sew all the way around, pivoting at the corners. When they're stitched together, we're going to clip the corners and turn the fabric out to the right side. Now, in order for the wrong side of the collar not to show on the right side, we're going to understitch the seam allowance to the under collar as close as possible to the seam to ensure that it doesn't peak on the right side. Okay, I know a few people who like to do their understitching from the wrong side of the fabric. For me, I prefer to do my understitching from the right side because I can see exactly where the seam is. So, question of the day. Which side do you prefer to understitch from? Wrong side or right side? Please let me know in the comment section below. It's also important to press the collar at this point and put it aside till later on. It's time to construct the pocket flaps. With the right sides of the pocket flaps together, I'm going to pin them and sew the flaps together along the bays, and the sides. So it has a bit of a corner there. So while stitching it, we're going to be extremely careful and, raise the foot a little bit and do a little bit of a pivot. Just got to be very careful to make sure we have a clean curve. With the pocket flaps stitched, I will clip the corners and turn them out to the right side and press them, and also sew a stay stitch along the cut edges of the flap just to hold it in place and ensure that it doesn't move around. Next would be to sew the flap between the notches on the lower fronts. I will be using the notch markings as a guide. I'm going to move on to constructing the body of the dress. So with right sides together, I'll sew the top front to the lower front, and I'll make sure that the pocket flaps are sandwiched in between both pieces. It also helps that we stitch the pocket flap onto the bottom half of the dress. Using your preferred method, you can finish off the raw edge and give it a press. Using the markings on the sewing pattern piece, I can definitely see the direction of the box pleat. I'm going to use that as a guide to pin my box pleat in place and sew the box pleat in the lower back. Now the stitch that I am making would be within the seam allowance. Remember, it's a 1 centimeter seam allowance, so I'm just giving it a bit of a press to ensure that it doesn't pucker whilst I sew. So with the right sides together, I am laying the top back onto the lower back, and I'm going to pin them in place and ensure that the box pleats are nice and flat. So over to the sewing machine, using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, we're going to sew from one end to the other. I am now laying the front and back shoulder seams together, right sides facing each other. Pin them together, and I'm going to use a 1 centimeter seam allowance to stitch the shoulder seams together. Using your preferred method again, finish off the raw edges. I'm using an overlocker here, and I'm also finishing off the raw edge around the sides of the dress and the hem of the dress at this point, just to make sure that I don't have to keep going back and forth to the overlocker. Back to the collar. I'm showing you this part of the collar because I would like for you to, at this point, sew a stay stitch to both the cut edges of the collar. So you start at the front edge and stop just before the shoulder notch. So what's going to happen now is we're going to carefully press under 1 centimeter of the under collar. We'll turn it under and press it because it's going to get stitched onto the back neck. So we want to fold it over now, and it would help us as a guide when we're done attaching the other sides of the collar to the neckline of the dress. Take a look at this side of the collar. Now the side that has the under stitching on it is the part that's going to lay on you. That's the wrong side of the collar, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do now is we're going to sew the made up collar to the neckline, and we're going to leave the back section of the under collar, you know, the part that was pressed under. We're going to leave that part open, so the back neckline can be sandwiched between the pressed edges, and we can edge stitch from one end to the other. Important at this point to locate the notches that you marked, because they would serve as a guideline and ensure that you have the collar attached properly to the neckline of your dress. With right sides together, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay the front facing onto the front body and pin it in place. At the sewing machine, I'm going to start at the shoulders and sew around the neckline, and then when I arrive at the revers point, you know, the point at the collar, I'm going to keep the needle down and turn the corner and continue sewing down the front. Okay, so when I arrive at the hem notch, I'm going to keep the needle down and I'm going to turn the corner and then stitch the base of the facing across the hem. With this done, I'm going to clip the corners and then turn the facing out to the right side and press it in place. Okay, at this point now I'm ready to tuck the neckline into the under collar because it's already folded and pressed. I'm going to edge stitch the back collar to the neckline. So I've got this shoulder line here, which needs to be sorted out to allow for me to have the shoulder line or the shoulder edge nice and flat. So I'll lay it flat and pin it in place. I'm going to stitch in the ditch just to make sure that I don't have the stitches visible on the right side of the dress. Another option would be to stitch the shoulder line to the front facing of the shoulder of the body. But when we have a look at this now, I've pressed it, but it still isn't hitting the spot because you can slightly see a little bit of the facing peeking out to the right side of the dress. So what I need to do is do an understitch. Now the understitch needs to happen close to the seam of the front facing. I'm going to stitch from the hem line up to the horizontal bust seam, you know, this line across the front bust, and then I'm going to sew an understitch to the revers on the side of the body, so on the other side of it, so that the understitch line doesn't show when you've got the dress on the right side. So in order to locate the armholes, I'm having to refer back to my sewing pattern, because after overlocking the raw edges, I feel like I've lost the notch or the notches. So using the sewing pattern piece, I'm finding my notch, and that would guide me to know where exactly the sleeves are. So what I'll do is turn the seams of the armhole to the inside, and then I'm going to stitch along to create an armhole. The sleeves are sorted now, which means we're ready to insert the pockets, which I already neatened using my overlocker. What I'm going to do now is I need to find exactly the notches for the pockets. As you remember, I said that after overlocking, it's just so hard to spot these notches, but here we have our notches. I'm going to put the pocket bag onto the front and the back along the side seams with right sides facing together, and sew the pocket bags in place. With right sides together now, I'm going to sew the front and back side seams together. I'll start at the notch on the upper side seam, and then I'll sew down to the notch that indicate the start of the side slit. Okay, I have my measuring gauge here now, which would help me to turn in exactly the 1 centimeter seam allowance along the side slits. I'm also going to use this opportunity to fold in and turn inside the hem of the dress on both sides, like the front and the back of the dress. So starting from one side of the hem, I'm going to sew all the way down the hem and then up the side slit. So I'm doing it this way so I don't have to stop and then have to start again with my stitches. Okay, so I have my hem sorted, I have my side slits sorted, and I've pressed my dress. The next thing to move on to now would be just add the finishing touches. So the buttonhole is going to go on the right hand side of the dress. I'm using the markings that I made earlier to help as a guide for stitching my buttonholes. Now I'm laying my right hand side over the left hand side to help me to mark the buttons to the left hand side of the dress. Using either a sewing machine or stitching by hand, you can then insert your buttons exactly where they're supposed to go and then give the dress a final press. And here we have it. I absolutely love this dress, and the fabric makes it feel even extra luxurious to me. It feels beautiful against my skin, and this dress is just a delight. Bear in mind that this pattern is a 2-in-1 pattern, and the exact same steps that we followed to create the dress can be followed to create the shirt, apart from having the side slits and the pockets along the side seams. I've got my shirt dress here with sneakers for a casual look. It can be paired with high heels depending on the occasion. Please remember, all the details of things that were used to create this dress will be found in the description box below. You can share your makes on the Minerva website. I am very excited to see what you make, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. All the very best. Take care. Bye.